Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and today we're talking about why I don't trust Riot Games and their anti-cheat, which is coming to the news once again and into my radar, and people have brought this whole situation up. Now before we start off, we're less than 30 seconds in, so I want to start off by saying this is not meant to be a fear-mongering video. Do not be scared watching this video. Put a smile on, get a beer, relax. We're going to be talking about some good old technical stuff. This is more of a principle situation. As you all know, I am not somebody that enjoys having invasive software run on my system, especially for a little vidya game, okay? Now, kernel anti-cheats and me do not go well together, okay? I am against every single kernel anti-cheat. It's not just Riot Games, it's almost any games company out there that chooses to install a piece of rootkit spyware level software on my system just for the sake of protecting cheating from actually happening in an online video game. Now, while cheating still occurs, anti-cheat is not perfect bulletproof solutions. I feel like in a lot of cases, the amount of risk that gets opened on people's systems is just not worth it. The juice, in my opinion, is not worth the squeeze. So to start off with, Riot Games is one company that produces two of the most popular online games out there. Valorant and League of Legends. Two games that I've played, not a whole lot or anything, but I've played them to understand the hype behind it. And while these games are absolutely great in their regards, League of Legends is still one of the most played MOBA games out there, with over 100 million actual users. Crazy stuff. Valorant, from my understanding, is a pretty good Counter-Strike, Overwatch type game, which has its own amazing dedicated community. My issue with this is Vanguard, and years ago you might have noticed that I made a video where I talked about Vanguard's anti-cheat and how it was running at ring 0, kernel level, most invasive levels on your system. Since then, a lot of other anti-cheats have come into the market. If you play Call of Duty, for instance, you also run Ricochet anti-cheat, which is kernel level. For instance, Battlefield, from my knowledge, introduced a new anti-cheat which broke Linux support for me and many other Linux gamers out there when they introduced a new, more invasive anti-cheat. From my understanding, BattleEye, which is the anti-cheat that powers Escape from Tarkov, and Rainbow Six Siege, one of my most played games recently, and in fact, where you're going to see most of the footage for this video, that is a kernel-level anti-cheat. Easy anti-cheat, which is one of the most popular anti-cheats out there, is also kernel level. See, the world of anti-cheat has evolved so much that every massive popular online game is using a kernel-level anti-cheat. And the reason they have to do that is because the arms race, the Cold War of cheating, has escalated to that level. Now, a couple days ago, weeks ago, you might have noticed that League of Legends was introducing something known as Vanguard anti-cheat into their game, okay? So for instance, they did talk about this in patch 14.9, okay? Now in this situation, they made a giant post where they actually talked about, Vanguard being installed into League of Legends. And we knew this was going to happen, okay? To understand, Vanguard launched with Valorant, but it was not going to just stay there forever. League of Legends and any of their games, any of the big popular multiplayer games, was going to get this add-on. So it was only a matter of time. The fact that it finally came is just a matter of it actually happening. So anyways, they actually launched the anti-cheat and they talked about this situation. And while the person, Mirage of Penguins, who wrote this says they're an anti-cheat artesian with a lifetime 85 million bans served. And that I wanted to absolutely congratulate, okay? Cheating is a serious problem in online games. And the reason why cheating has gotten so bad and why these anti-cheats unfortunately exist is because back in the olden days of cheating, it was a simple matter of opening up another program on your system, and in some cases today it still can be, depending on how protected the game is, running a cheat and basically ruining the experience for other people in the game. Now, because of that, and cheats used to run in things like user space, which was one, I guess you could say, ring of systems. When anti-cheats caught up to those level of cheats, the cheat developers went a level lower. And the level lower that we're talking about here is something known as DMA cheats. This is just one style of hardware cheating. Now, if you're looking at this diagram and wondering what the fuck is going on here, think of this as your gaming computer, right? And what you would do is you would connect a DMA card, which is basically plugging into the same place you would put your graphics card, and it would dump the memory to another computer. So to give you guys a quick understanding, an understanding visually, let's say that I'm playing a multiplayer game of Rainbow Six right here on my main system. Now that's a secondary system that I have in the background. What I do is I dump the memory from this computer all the way over to that computer. And using other software, other hardware like a KM box for instance, I am introducing aimbots, cheats, and various scripts that anti-cheats probably are unable to detect or even know are running. So what does an anti-cheat have to do? It develops a stage lower to catch up with the cheating software and detects those hardware cheats and what you're doing on your system that goes beyond the scope of what it originally could detect. And so the cheat developers go a stage lower, and then the anti-cheat goes lower, 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 until we get to a point where these guys are running so invasive, both sides, that at the end of the day, it's just I would say net negative for the average person. And you can't blame any anti-cheat software out there. For them to protect their games, they have to do this. Look, at the end of the day, there are games that are entirely ruined because of the cheating problems that exist. For instance, Escape from Tarkov has a massive cheating issue. You might have heard about this, but you might have noticed that people who play hardcore games like that, if they aimbot you across the map and make you lose all of your gear, progress, rank, whatever, same goes for Siege even. If you have somebody aimbotting and killing you and ruining your experience, if you play Siege for 2 days, you'll probably see a whole slew of players being banned. It's a serious epidemic and a problem. It trips the anti-cheats and people who ruin experiences. And if your game has like, let's say 40% of people that are cheating, that's like that's 40% of the player base potentially ruining the experience. And that makes the other 60% not want to play your game. Because what's the point of playing a competitive shooter if you're literally going to be losing and losing your rank and wasting hours of your life, not actually meaningfully advancing? Now, for a lot of these big popular games like Vanguard, Call of Duty, Rainbow Six, I wouldn't say that cheating is the worst thing imaginable. I think these are relatively secure games. And according to Riot, they would say that League of Legends is a fairly secure game. They say the server simulates the entirety of the game state, and the client is really only responsible for making requests to it, often referred to as an authoritative model. So again, a lot of this processing, the logic of the game that you're playing is happening on the server side versus leaving it for clients to report and request. So they talk about things like scripting, for instance. They talk about botting. They talk about people who abuse the free-to-play model by basically creating new accounts, buying new accounts to cheat on for as little as $1.99. It is insane. So again, they talk about Vanguard, which they say, unlike most anti-cheats, it's made up of preventative and detective layers. We endeavor to outright block as many cheating methods as possible. But there are issues. You might be wondering, Muda, if anti-cheat like Vanguard is so invasive, why doesn't it stop all anti-cheats? And that is kind of a dumb thing to mention, okay? And I'll mention why. This is, again, an arms race, okay? Vanguard is not going to stop every single possible cheating software that exists. Same with any anti-cheat. And in some cases, they may choose to let certain cheats run for a little while, so they can gather more data until they eventually ban people in what are known as ban waves. So that's kind of how they choose to go about doing this, right? Now, there have been a few updates to the system as well. For instance, if you are playing League of Legends on an older computer, you may have to enable something known as TPM 2.0, which is something that is pretty much a requirement for Windows 11. So if you have a modern gaming computer that you bought in the last few years, or you have Windows 11 running on your system without modifying the setup at all, you have TPM 2.0 enabled, okay? So for most people, this isn't necessarily an issue. It's an issue if you have a really old system, or you never had secure boot or things like this enabled, which you may have to start modifying if you want to allow Vanguard to run. Remember, Vanguard is a requirement, and you need this if you're going to play games like League of Legends in the future. Now, before you go asking, but Muda, do I have this arcane TPM? Seriously, go to your start button on Windows, type in TPM, and if you see security processor, click on that, and it should take you to an image that tells you if you have a trusted platform module. As long as you see specification version 2.0, you're pretty much good to go. If everything is ready, all of it's good, that means you don't have to worry about anything, and it was already enabled from the beginning. So the reason they mention they need this is TPM is a trusted platform module. And the two reasons they need it is to add security to cert signing validation, which is something they rely on to know if other software can be trusted. But the second, and more important, is because it acts as an extremely non-fungible form of hardware ID. If it's on and working, we can pretty much assume you don't intend to cheat. Because if you did, we could easily banish the chip from this realm forever. And so, of course, they also mention things like the driver to confirm that, of course, they're trying to alleviate all of the security issues that they have. So when they talk about things like, isn't Vanguard spyware? And the writer for this says, no, but I'm sure those words in the exact order are mathematically the fastest way to farm retweets. Content algorithms everywhere are programmatically addicted to the clicks the word spyware or rootkit can generate. So again, they talk about, this is steering people away from, informative journalism and faux pandemonium. Again, I want to start off by educating people and not fear-mongering you out there. Is Vanguard spyware? Now look, at the end of the day, Vanguard shares similarities, but spyware, malware, I always attribute those to actual negative pieces of software, right? So again, when we're talking about negative pieces of software, we are talking about hacks that actually steal information from you. Now, one of the reasons why Vanguard exists is there are actual cheating groups out there, and we talked about this a month ago when Call of Duty cheaters actually lost their Bitcoin because hackers had targeted cheating software, actual invasive cheating software, not the anti-cheat, the cheating software, to actually steal money and information from these players. See, cheaters, they run the most viciously invasive software on their system, and they pay the price, but we also pay the price by having our systems invaded into to an extent. Now, the other allegation of spyware that they receive is because they are tied to a Chinese publisher. So for instance, they even talk about the situation too when it comes to companies like Tencent. Now, Tencent is the parent company of Riot Games. And while Riot Games is an American company, Tencent is a Chinese multinational technology conglomerate, okay? And if it's something about the Chinese government that people need to understand is that they basically have the final say in getting whatever data they want. Now, according to Canadian intelligence, the Canadian state government, they've mentioned these specific laws. So for instance, China's intelligence law and the country's future intelligence competitions. So what they mention here is the intelligence law does not specifically name China's intelligence services. Instead, the law describes the national intelligence work institutions as intelligence organizations. So when they talk about the implications of the law, as long as national intelligence institutions are operating within their proper authorities, they may, according to Article 14, request relevant organs, organizations, and citizens provide necessary support, assistance, and cooperation. So, according to the Canadian government, and this is the opinion of plenty of governments who have interpreted this law, the Chinese government can basically request information from Tencent or really any Chinese tech company that, any data that goes to their servers, they have to pass along to the government. So the fear here is because the government of China owns basically this company or has access to Tencent's information at any given moment, the player base of, Valorant or League of Legends or any real software owned by China, they're at risk. And while there is some truth to that, I would say if you're fearful of the Chinese government spying on you, just installing Valorant or League of Legends or any game from their country or owned by their country or a company that exists in their country that owns it is already just as bad. You don't need an invasive anti-cheat as much as just having their software running and installed and operating at any given moment. Now, I've also done my own fair share of assessments here. So I've actually had a Raspberry Pi that I used as a in-between between my gaming computer and my router. And that existed just so I could capture internet traffic and see what Riot Games' software was doing. Now, it's pretty hard to tell what Valorant and Vanguard and League of Legends is doing, but as far as my knowledge has gone, and as far as my actual assessments have gone, the information that transfers between your computer to Riot or Tencent servers only happens as the game is running, okay? Even if the Vanguard driver is running in the background, as far as my actual testing has gone, nothing errant occurs outside of the game running, which is ultimately a good thing, right? It's a good thing. Now, comparing the Chinese government to the American government and American companies, you have American companies that actually fight the government. For instance, Apple versus the FBI was a pretty popular case that I talk about all the time. And what happened was, at the time, the FBI asked Apple to unlock an iPhone that belonged to a perpetrator for a very vicious attack on the government. And Apple had denied the access because they themselves said they had no access to the device. See, the way American companies work is oftentimes they'll encrypt, lock the device, and throw away the key. So the government comes up to a company and they'll be like, hey, open the device. They'll be like, dog, I wish we could, but we don't even fucking have access to it. So what do you want us to do? And that sparks a whole war between them. If this was China, This company, if they wanted to or not, would be compelled to the government. These are the differences between these two countries and their laws. Now, of course, if we want to put the tinfoil hat on, clearly that law is, you'd have to be naive to think that big tech does not collude with the government in any capacity too. So again, your mileage varies, right? But obviously the US government is a little bit better than than the Chinese government in this case. So when they talk about why they need anti-cheat, that's a pretty self-explanatory thing. Obviously, companies probably don't want to put fucking anti-cheat into their game. They're forced to because unfortunately cheaters exist en masse and ruin experiences. So then they talk about things like Linux, and while they've never supported Linux, League of Legends ran underneath Linux just fine. Unfortunately, according to Riot, they said that yesterday, at the time of posting this article 3 weeks ago, there were just over 800 Linux users on League. And they don't believe that supporting Linux is worth the actual payoff. And it's true because they do talk about how Linux doesn't afford them sufficient ability to attest boot state, kernel modules, and just by design, it's less, I guess, friendly than Windows in letting them attest if that environment is good. Now, the other thing that we have to talk about is Vanguard runs all the time. And it's true, Vanguard does live on your computer at boot time. So if you fire up a Windows system with Vanguard installed, at the bottom left in the system tray, you'll notice that there is a Vanguard icon. And that exists as you boot up the system to verify that your system is trusted. So what happens is if you turn off their anti-cheat, you basically have to reboot the computer, go through the whole initiation process again, just to make sure your computer is trusted yet again for this game to run. And that's just Vanguard's requirement. From my knowledge, no other anti-cheat is that hardcore. For instance, BattleEye, which runs, their driver activates as you play the game. For instance, Faceit anti-cheat, which you can toggle on and off as much as you want within one boot state, that's fine. But when it comes to Vanguard, you have to restart constantly in order to get your computer trusted again. Turning off their anti-cheat makes your computer untrustworthy. And their logic here is, listen, at the end of the day, we don't know what you do when you turn off our anti-cheat. You might enable some software that we may not be able to pick up on, and that's just not worth us risking it. Restart your system from scratch. So what they also mention is Riot only collects what we need to run and secure our games. More data is just more risk to us, and we don't want anything except the bare minimum required to get the job done. Vanguard has system hooks to run its protections, but we're not shipping back your files or documents. Like most anti-malware and anti-cheat systems, we leverage a technique called signature scanning to determine if a series of bytes in memory matches a known cheating application. The results of these are only true or false, and we try to use this pattern for other checks too. For are you using a DMA device, the device I talked about earlier? Or did an application just try to submit input to the game? So we need snapshots to scrutinize in post, and there are chances these can contain personal identifiable information. For example, we log the file path of every library loaded into League, and this could contain a username if it's in a user folder. We do things like this so that after a cheat is discovered, we stand a chance to detect cheaters who have already used it, okay? And again, this type of data is only in warm storage for 14 days, and we will never use it for anything that is not cheat detection. So again, this all requires that you trust Riot Games. And for me, I generally don't have trust for really any company. It's no disrespect to Riot or anybody, I just don't run software like this on a main system. Now, Riot, in a lot of cases, has put a lot of money on the line for people that can hack their anti-cheat kernel driver. So for instance, if you want to make $100,000, you can show code execution on the kernel level for their cheat driver, bjk.sys. So if you want to make $100,000 and you feel like you have the chops for it, give it a shot, give it a try, they'll pay you. Now, when it comes to cheat software like this too, one of the fears that I have sometimes is when anti-cheat drivers are used to abuse actual people. So for instance, Genshin Impact. You might be wondering, why the fuck does that game need an anti-cheat kernel driver? It's because it's a gacha game and they're trying to protect their roles from being exploited, yada yada. So that's where most of their money is made. So when they talk about it, this is from Trend Micro. I talked about this back in 2022 anyways, but a ransomware infection was triggered in a user environment that had endpoint protection properly configured. Analyzing the sequence, they found that the code-signed driver, myprot2.sys, which is the anti-cheat driver for Genshin Impact, was being abused to bypass privileges. As a result, commands from kernel mode killed the endpoint protection processes. So yeah, in some cases, you didn't even need the game installed. People just used a component from an anti-cheat to assist their nefarious purposes. So now I want to address some of the little bit of misinformation that's been existing. For instance, Riot Games has apparently been removing comments through their Reddit board talking about people who've had their PCs bricked because of this anti-cheat. So for instance, one user says, "Please help me, my laptop won't boot up after Vanguard patch. I can see on my laptop charger that it won't even draw power from the outlet anymore." So again, according to Riot, one of the responses was, "An issue like this wouldn't be related to Vanguard, but if you haven't restarted your computer in a while, it could be related to your CMOS battery, since that's what powers the startup chain. This is an issue I'm really equipped to speak on since it's not related to anti-cheat and Vanguard." And of course, another person comes in and says, "Multiple people getting the same situation after patching leak with Vanguard must be the user's fault. Everyone, CMOS's battery and motherboards decided to shit the bed when Vanguard launched. Go back and don't force this." So of course, even the developer says Vanguard wouldn't affect any of this situation whatsoever. So again, I don't know the validity of this because I haven't seen these people's laptops, but if there is a chance that your software was the only thing that changed between reboots, and after that a computer's having issues, maybe your software might need to be reassessed. But I do agree with the developer. I don't think that the cheating software necessarily is going to fuck up your computer's charging in that situation. One other example that showed up immediately for me a year ago on Reddit was one commenter even saying, "It is very invasive. Vanguard does not like a lot of things like overclocking or other development related tools. My friend literally got banned because he had overclocked his system and Vanguard didn't like it. Vanguard corrupted my OS 2 times, which required a full Windows reinstall." So I'm not here discounting this person's experience. Obviously, I would need to see this by my first glance to really understand if this was causing any issues. From my understanding and the computer that I use, which is literally designed just to play video games on, just to play games like Rainbow Six Siege, never really had an issue with the Vanguard driver running in the background. But then again, I'm also not doing development work or any form of really invasive work on my system anyways. It's just designed to play video games. So this is an interesting thing that I've seen. And again, this isn't the only actual issue. There's an entire Reddit board filled in the last few days of people having issues. So using Undit, for example, one of the actual mega threads on the League of Legends board, patch 14.9, in regards to this, has like 43.8% removed comments, which is wild indeed. And while a lot of these talked about Vanguard's conflict with fan control, some of the comments that were removed was it also periodically takes screenshots of every monitor, which is something we're actually going to get into because this is not a Vanguard exclusive. This is something that I believe is a bit slanderous, if you will, too. But the more you go down into it, the more and more you see these comments being removed in relation to Vanguard and whatnot. So clearly it was a bit of an issue. There's been some spring cleaning that has gone on. So yeah, it's a wild world, okay? It's a wild situation. But let's dive into some of the misinformation and the hot takes that I've seen floating around about this anti-cheat. Now, the other thing that I've been sort of seeing floating around on this is one really popular tweet that got sent around where people were looking at code that was basically reverse engineered from what Valorant or Vanguard was doing. And I was apparently taking photos of your desktop and sending it over. So in this situation, this person said, "Not only does Vanguard send screenshots of your computer daily, they also monitor your clipboard and your recycling bin. Extremely illegal." So I went to the original post, which happened to be on a cheating software website, and I decided to look at it. I'm like, how bad could this really be? So I started reading through some of this code, and while, yeah, I guess it seems like it's capturing virtual screens, so it seems like it's capturing just the viewport of what you're looking at, the game window, maybe your actual main monitor, just so it can see that maybe you're having like DMA processes or memory dumping or something on the side. At the end of the day, nothing here necessarily jumps into your computer's clipboard, which is where you control copy, control paste, could contain sensitive information, or it looks through your recycle bin. Nothing in this code screams doing that. And in fact, if you're worried about Vanguard doing this, a lot of popular anti-cheat softwares would take screenshots of your system. That is mostly because they're using it to see if you have actual cheats running visually on your screen. Maybe you're dumping memory, maybe you're doing something shady. That's why anti-cheats would do this. So if you're worried about Vanguard doing this, I'm gonna tell you right now, a lot of the big ones do the same thing as well. The other thing I saw was this massive post where people are saying Vanguard anti-cheat is telling people to delete System32 if they want to play. What? Delete System32? Now, let me tell you something. That's haram. Don't be doing that on your system. Basically, they said Vanguard has blocked the following file from loading on your system. Device, hard disk volume 3, Windows, system 32, drivers, ks.sys. To disable Vanguard, please right-click on the Vanguard notification icon and hit Exit Vanguard. This will put your system in an untrusted state. You will have to restart in order to play games. Would you like to learn more? Dog, nowhere in that did it say delete system 32. It just says that there is a problem with file confliction. So if you don't want to, have any issues, just disable us. It's literally telling you to kill the anti-cheat to support your system more, okay? Nowhere is Valorant telling you to delete system. No fucking developer would tell you to delete system files off of your operating system. That is just a fucking liability waiting to happen. People need to learn how to goddamn read something every once in a while, okay? Now look, at the end of the day, it might sound like I am running cover for some of these organizations, or maybe I'm just trying to defend Riot Games or Valorant. Look, at the end of the day, Kernel anti-cheat is invasive as fuck, and I don't trust it, period. Which is one of the reasons why, before we end the video off, I'm going to tell you right now, here are your solutions. You can either not play these games anymore, which is totally fine. If you don't trust them, you shouldn't play them. But if you enjoy these kind of games, maybe consider purchasing a console, where these games are very much locked to their systems, okay? Or the third option is, like me, I ended up just getting a different computer, just so I can play games like Rainbow Six Siege, and not have to compromise my main system's actual integrity. You might be wondering, Muda, why are you so worried? I'm not worried about the Chinese government spying on me, nor am I worried about Riot, nor am I necessarily worried about any of that. I do get worries about software like this running invasive and potentially being abused by bad actors. Now, while it hasn't happened in Valorant's case, or Vanguard's, it is something that I just choose not to install because I don't trust it, period. I understand the dangers and the risks associated with increasing your attack vectors like this, so I just don't do them in general. And it's one of those things where I stress, you probably do sensitive stuff on your computer all the time. You probably open up your banks, do your taxes. Maybe you have sensitive images on your system of you and your spouse. Maybe you don't want those potentially being infected. Maybe you've got some, for instance, me, I've got a YouTube channel that I don't want hacked. So I try to make sure I run everything in its own containers, virtual machines. So I try to isolate naughty or untrusted software on different partitions, different layers. And you might think that's paranoid, but trust me, I would rather not have to deal with my channel being infected, hacked, maybe have to deal with YouTube's, partner managers if I potentially get taken down because some hacker uploaded porn on my account, and boom, that's just a headache waiting for it to happen. So these are things that I worry about, and I try to minimize the damage. Now, while I don't trust Riot Games, it's not necessarily because I dislike anybody at Riot Games. It's because I just don't trust anybody, any gaming company really, running this level of invasive stuff on my main system. And I think most people should have that mentality. I wish we could live in a world where this kind of stuff never had to exist, but unfortunately, cheaters exist. And if you want to play some of the best games in the world, I guess you have to kind of give up some of your security just to be able to play a couple games to relax and de-stress. It's fucking wild. But yeah, I wanted to talk about this because it came in, and if this video was a little long and complicated, I'm sorry. It's because there's a lot to talk about, and sometimes there's only so much you can layman things up. But that said, ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed today's video, let me know in the comment section below. This is me, Mudahar, and yeah, I am out.